Hi, folks. Welcome to the OFM podcast where metabolic health matters. And I'm your host, Peter Defty. And today we have an ultra endurance legend on there. He might not shy away from that, but he is a legend because it's not that he tells me this. This is other people that say, oh, you know, Kurt Madden, he's one Ultraman. And so I want to welcome Kurt Madden, who I've had the pleasure to work with over a year now, right? Since Mike Makovich introduced us. And Kurt and I have just hit it off, and he's become a Vespa acolyte, and I've been an acolyte of his in many ways, which we'll talk about on the show. But I wanted to introduce Kurt, and I'm just going to introduce him because he really is a legend. So I want him to share some of his background and experience in ultra endurance because it's not just triathlon. I'm finding this out. You know, it's not just Ironman or Ultraman, it's Leadville and some other interesting things. So, Kurt, welcome to the podcast. And please share with us your vast history and experience.
Yeah, well, first of all, Peter, it's an honor to be here. It's hard to believe we're up to our 1 year anniversary, so we can, salute, tip our glasses, do whatever. And I think you have had a major impact as I continue to be a person that wants to grow and learn and really excel. I think, in all aspects of life that our relationship has just been profound, and also just sharing my success with other people that I work with throughout the world. And I think it's a good thing because at the end of the day, as you and I have talked, it's really about health. It's about taking your story and optimizing your story and not being able to go back, but it's actually going forward. So for a high level view for our listeners, I hope that you can gain some insights. I'm probably going to share more of my failures than my successes. And I'm just so grateful for the people that have, created the path for me and been mentors for me. And I think I'm at this point in my life now where I want to give back, and I think that's important. But the short version is that I was, believe it or not, it was kind of an inner city kid. And when I was born, I think my nickname was Butterball. And that means I was kind of plump. I was a little bit big, and I think back in that point in time, it was good to have a chubby baby. And then I know my parents got divorced when I was 5. I can recall that I went into some type of physical exam, and they did an EKG, and the doctor shared with my father that we don't anticipate your son's going to live more than 6 months. In fact, the best thing that he can do is just stay inside. And so I'm, a 5 or 6 year old, and, separated parents, divorced. And I'm like, so I'm going to be locked up in prison the rest of my life. And I'm so glad, I'm so grateful for my dad to say, we probably should get a second opinion. And lo and behold, he did. And the second doctor, cardiologist, said, well, yeah, he does have some type of malfunction. Now, again, back then, I don't know exactly what it was, if it was a murmur, whatever the case might be, but I had a little bit of an issue. And the second doctor took a whole different tack, and he said, the best thing we can do is get him out to make the heart stronger. So I think that was a window of opportunity. When you're inner city and you've got one parent that needs to put food on the table, the word vacation, if there was internet back then, the word vacation didn't exist. It's like I just played all day long. And as I came up through the ranks in San Diego, I knew that my survival was going to be in the athletic arena. Now, it was kind of neat for some of our listeners back in the day. If you remember, you did something called the physical fitness test. And I think there was the 50-yard dash. Well, I was actually at terminal velocity at 3 seconds into that, knowing that that was it. I was tapped out. So I had no power, no fast twitch muscle fibers, but I could go all day long. And then as I went through high school, I wanted to play football because that was kind of the name of the game in my community, but I didn't have the power, and I loved to swim. So in the fall, I had shoulder pads on, but in the spring, I had on this little bathing suit with goggles. And I didn't know which direction I was going to go, but as time went on, before I knew it, I moved to the beach, and I got in a swim competition, just showed up as a 21-year-old, didn't even train. Out of 400 people, I was like 30th. And the light went off like, whoa, what if I actually trained? And the next year I got a little bit more serious, and I was more prepared. I was 3rd overall. And then the winner of that, or the organizer of that race, was Tom Warren. if you go back in the history of Ironman, Tom won. He was in Sports Illustrated, not with the swimsuit edition, but he actually won. He won. He won not Kona, but he won Ironman when it was on Oahu. So he shared with me, you should definitely go over. And before I knew it, I was running home telling my wife, Tom said I should do this, so we're going to do it. I got a bike, I paid $20, and I'm over on Oahu. Like, whoa, there's 99 people. And it was an open course, and it was a swim in Alawanama Harbor because there was 20-foot surf at Waikiki. The pre-race meeting was very easy. It was like, guys, we're going to keep it super simple. Just a couple words. Don't cheat. Do you have any questions? One person raised their hand and said, well, what if you can't swim? Well, you should figure that out because you have 2.4 miles to maybe dog paddle. So these are all true stories. I did the swim, no problem at all. I got on the bike. Again, it was an open course, so your crew kind of leapfrogged you on with you. You had Jim Lampley, you had Diana Nyad. If I look back at the video, it's like the cameras then were gigantic. I mean, huge cameras compared to what we have today. And, people had second bikes on the car just in case. We went through Oahu. I flatted at mile 110. My crew couldn't get me. I just rode it in on just on the rim the last 2 miles before I knew it. They gave us this little piece of paper, and this was the course we were going to follow. Just follow the map. Well, as you sweat and perspire, this little map, you're not going to follow it very well because nothing was really marked. So I got to about mile 2 or 3, and there was a Hawaiian there smoking a big doobie. And I said, brah, where do you go? And he said, brah, you go that way. Diamond Head, go, brah. And he just kept doing his business. And I waved at him and I said, hey, hang loose. And before I knew it, I'm running and running. They actually had scales in the marathon to weigh ourselves. So you couldn't lose more than 10% of your body weight. And that was for a safety thing. And I know Dave Scotty tells the story how he dropped a water bottle in the back of his shorts, and they were amazed that he was gaining weight because he did have the bottle in his back of the shorts. And I get up to about mile 16, I look ahead and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's Tom Oren. That is the guy that invited me. And I have an opportunity to get by him. My wife's screaming out the car. She's just, going to the whip, like, you've got to pass Tom. And I'm thinking, this is like a moral dilemma. This is the guy that invited me, and I hope he forgives me, but I felt good. So I passed Tom. I finished 7th, and I said, this will never happen again. It's like a Woodstock. And little did I realize, again, before the internet, that this thing was going to get legs overnight. So they did the ABC Wide Sports. Before you know it, we go to 1982, and Julie Moss is literally crawling on the ground, trying to get to that finish line in February. And Kathleen McCartney passes her. This thing really goes big. And I come back in October now as a pro. And during that time, I met Mark Allen. And in October of 82, I was 6th overall. Felt real good about that. And from there, I got into the Ultraman, and that's the Ultraman World Championship. I was the first person in that first year of 1983. So the first day is a 10K swim, 6-mile swim. We rode at that point 65 miles to the other side of the island. Day 2 was 170 miles on the bike. Day 3 was the double marathon. And I was honored and tickled and grateful that I won that in 83. I won that in 85. And then from there, I kind of took a break because I got into education. I know we'll talk about that later in the podcast, Peter, but I got into some trail running, and we can talk more about that. But then I came back into triathlons in about 2014. I just felt I was really more in my element, that I love trail running, but I wanted to get back to swimming, biking, and running, and I was able to do that, and then kind of move up through the ranks and be a top age grouper, and then started coaching triathletes, and now, working for Tridot and working with other coaches throughout the world, and did go back and did the Ultraman. I did it in 2013, and then in 2019, I was inducted into the Ultraman Hall of Fame. So that's kind of maybe longer than a minute or two, but that's about 40 plus years of just doing crazy stuff.
And you're still competing. You competed at the Ironman World Championships last year in Nice in your age group.
Yes, still very.
That was racing conservatively. You're still able to, be 12th overall.
Right, and I think as you and I know, that I was dealing with some things at that time, going into that race that I wasn't probably just dealing with a medical issue. I wasn't on top of my game. But yeah, I think it's nice. There's great camaraderie in each age group, and it's humbling. And I just love to race. And there's no secret there. There's something about racing that it just really it takes it up a notch. So I do enjoy that. I'm now getting ready for Texas, and then I've got Kona in October, and then I've got some other 70.3s this year. So it's a full year of racing.
Oh, fantastic. So you're still doing it. And you competed in the Leadville 100-mile trail run, didn't you, at the time that Ann Trason and the Tarahumara were having it out, which was made famous by Born to Run. Right.
Yeah, and right, and the short version on that is that, as I left the kind of the ranks as a pro triathlete, and then I got into education, that both my wife and I were teachers, so we would spend summers camping, and of all places, we ended up in Leadville. And we're walking through town. Yeah, we stayed right there at Turquoise Lake. And we're walking through town. It was a sports shop. And I look in and we just go inside, and it was a Leadville 100. And I see a guy, Jim OBrien. Jim OBrien. Yeah, Jim OBrien. And Jim and I we were in graduate school at San Diego State. And I'm like, oh my gosh, Jim OBrien won this race? So I started thinking about that, and I went back to the campground. I'm laying there all night like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it, that Jim won this race. This is like, I know this guy in Eastern San Diego. So the next morning I get up very quietly at about 5:30, and I said, I'm going to see if I can run around Turquoise Lake. So I literally ran for like an hour and 45 minutes. I came back. My wife's like, you do not look good. And I'm like, no, I don't feel all that good. But something ticked, and lo and behold, I said, I'm going to try this. And as I go big, sometimes maybe to a fault, I figure, what the heck, for a tune-up for Leadville, I'm just going to go do this race called Hard Rock. So that was my first, that was my
Hard Rock. Your first
oh yeah,
Hard Rock.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Oh, man, you are a legend.
No, I was young, wild, and a little bit free, but yeah. So I went into Hard Rock with some background in trail running. That was my first 100-miler, but I couldn't assimilate 10 or 12,000 feet. So I did what I could here in San Diego. But yeah, we showed up, and my strategy was real simple. What was the guy's name that won it? Dave somebody. He had won it the year before. So I figured out what I would do literally is I'm just going to stay on this guy's hip until he can no longer go. And I actually stayed with him for about 40 miles. And then he had a real bad nosebleed. We were actually, from Uray, we were over in a different, in Telluride, and we were going up the hill. He says, I just can't go anymore. So I hooked up with somebody else, a guy named Paul, and we ran through the night. And then he had a pacer, a guy named Neil, and Neil was actually up on Mount Everest when the disaster happened up there. So they're telling me these stories all night long about, yeah, we camped out at 13,000 feet. I've been on Mount Everest. And I'm like, well, I've been on this little mountain in San Diego called Mount Laguna that was only 6,000 feet. So we ran all night long, and the next morning, we were at about, I don't know, hour 30, and I said, hey guys, you go ahead. And I was not in a good place. I think really at about mile 85, I definitely started to hallucinate. That last aid station, I saw things that didn't even exist. And somehow I got back on that trail, and I was 6th overall at Hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, 33.
6 overall at Hard Rock.
Yeah. Yeah.
Come on, Kurt.
Yeah.
Those are bragging rights anybody in ultra running would love to have, because you can't even do Hard Rock now as your first 100.
Oh yeah, totally. I was so fortunate, again, being at the right place at the right time. But that was very intentional, because then I knew from there that as I went into Leadville, the gap was 6 weeks, and I'm like, this is perfect, because I've got a great workout underneath my belt. It's a more technical course. When I went to Leadville, I was going to be able to run more. Then all of a sudden I show up, and there's the Tarahumara Indians, and there's Ann Trace, and I'm like, whoa, I'm with the big fish now. And this time I wasn't like, I'm going to hang with Ann Trace and see until she hands me my butt to me. I better sit back a little bit. But the way that race shaped up, it was like her and Juan Herrera duked it out. I mean, big time. They just went mano y mano, and he put the hammer down, on the way back, and he opened up a big gap. And I was in 4th place till about mile 85. And then I know two Tar Mars were running by me. I came into that last aid station. I think it was at
May
Half
Queen,
Moon.
May
May
Queen,
Queen.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
May Queen down at the far end of the lake. And my brother-in-law says, "Man, you're in deep poop." And I'm like, "I think I'm feeling pretty good. I'm like in sixth place. I mean, I'm hanging in there." He goes, "No, those Tahar Mars." He said they just left. They had two bean burritos and two beers. So can I serve you? Serve you? And I said, no, no, no. We're not touching that. I'm at 10,000 feet. I'm going to stay with what I can do. So I was sixth there. And then I came, that was in 94. And then they did do the book Born to Run. And that was great. And I came back in 97 and I was second. And I think my time that year, 97, I think I went like 1904. So for a
Won it that
flatlander,
year.
it was a guy from Colorado. I'd have to
Oh, I
pull
know
up the
who it was, and I
resource.
can't remember his name,
Big
but
tall guy.
okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
you mentioned him before, and the closest I got to him is, we went on the backside of Hope Pass, and we started coming back. And as we were climbing back up Hope Pass, I could see him. It was like I wanted to go in for the kill shot, but I knew I couldn't. I'm like within 10 minutes of that guy, and I'm like, nah, I've got a long way to go back. I better just not burn my matches. I think the gap was he beat me by an hour, but for me to finish second, I was like,
Oh,
whoa,
yeah,
yeah.
second coming from San Diego, racing against a guy who's living at that altitude. That's huge, Kurt.
Mm-hmm.
That's huge.
Yep.
Wonderful. Wow. That's something. Yeah, and let's also talk about you as an educator, and let's and meld that into to where we want to go with this, because I think it's really germane to the audience, about who you are, but also where we are mutually trying to take things in a way to really make the sport and people better. You know, a rising tide floats all ships, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you certainly, I have to say, you've mentored me in a lot of ways you probably don't realize, and I think it's because of your educational background and philosophy. So tell us a little bit about your journey there real quick, and then we'll kind of get on to it.
Yeah. I think for me, I was the first person in my family to graduate from high school, first person to get an associate degree, bachelor's degree, and master's degree in exercise physiology. So I took a great deal of pride that as I had so many times and travel of just reflecting, like I knew I wasn't going to ride the pro triathlete wave very long, and my wife Kelly and I had talked about having kids, and I was going to have a certain amount of income and cash flow and stability. I knew that was going to be my fallback. Some of my colleagues or fellow competitors, they decided to go all in and they gave up everything to be a pro, and I didn't want to go there. My wife and I had conversations about that, and I knew I'd made the right choice. So I knew that really that was going to be my go-to, and it was like I had the ideal job when I was a pro. I was a part-time community college physical educator, so I could do PE classes. I was a running coach, swimming coach, track and field coach, but at the end of the day, I didn't get a contract, and I needed more revenue. And before you know it, I jumped into K through 12 education and continued in PE. I was a science teacher for 5 years, which I think was really good. That gave me some credibility. And, sometime during that point, someone who I had encountered in several professional development meetings, they pulled me aside and they kind of whispered, like, someday you're going to be a superintendent. And I'm like, that's a very bizarre statement. That wasn't in my roadmap. I was just going to be kind of a PE type guy, but one thing led to the next, and all of a sudden I'm an assistant principal at various high schools throughout San Diego, and kind of just getting my reps in on leadership and how to work with people, and how to make kids do their best, and learning about communities, and really just gaining that credibility. And before I knew it, I was a principal. And that was awesome. My first assignment was at an inner city in San Diego at a middle school, and that was humbling. And then I was a principal at a very high performing high school in San Diego. And after about 3 years, I thought that I was going to kind of die on that planet or on that campus, because it was the plum of the entire district, and we were awesome in athletics, academics. It was just incredible. But I was on a accreditation visit one year to accredit a district or a high school up in Big Bear. And before I knew it, I'm up there, and during the 3 days up there, they tell me they're looking for a superintendent, and I didn't go up there with those aspirations. And on that long drive home, I'm starting to think about it. It's like, maybe this is something I should think about. So I ran it by, again, my wife, Kelly. I reached out to the search firm and they said, hey, throw your hat in the ring. And before I knew it, I was prepping to leave the dream job for someplace I'd never been in a new community. But again, the planets kind of lined up. And before I knew it, I was in the first interview and the vibe was positive. It was good. And they called me back the next day. And before I knew it, I had to give my notice. And it was with really, really mixed feelings. I was leaving my home in San Diego to go to the mountains, to be there. And it was a blessing in disguise because it really taught me a lot more about working with communities again, working with a board of directors, really creating a vision, working on policies, professional development, focusing on kids. And I worked up there for about 4 years, which was fantastic. And then I went down to a smaller or a bigger school district, but small in LA County for about a year. And I think I was at that point where the light went off in my head to say, I've checked a lot of boxes, but time to spend with my wife, time to play, time to train, things that really warm my heart. I was very distanced from that. I was losing that drive and ambition. That it sounds great, and don't get me wrong, that was an awesome experience, but I knew that I had to, make a shift. And before I knew it, I gathered my team together and just started talking about it. And they said, this is easy. Why don't you just go back to what you love doing? Why don't you just start coaching? And from there, I started working at Tridot in 2016 as a part-time coach, and then I was still overseeing charter schools as a CEO. I filled in. I thought it was going to be for 6 months, but that actually went on for about 5 or 6 years to work with 5 different board of directors to do a lot of professional development, and that was good. And then about a year and a half ago, our CEO Jeff Boer and we were meeting in Boulder. We had several meetings, and he said, I think I know where I can get you on the bus in the right seat, and I want you to head up our coaching development program. And wow, it's just been incredible that I've kind of parlayed everything that I've done to where I am. And I've surrounded myself with really good people to have an impact, not just on athletes, but have, an opportunity to have an impact with coaches, throughout the world.
Yeah, and this is exactly what brings you to where you are now, is you're melding all this experience both in a professional career as an educator and consequently as a superintendent to as an athlete. So now you kind of created your own perfect dream job because you love what you do, and that's as a coach, and then as a development and project, which is kind of like high level. You're combining being a teacher, a principal, and a superintendent with mentoring others and all that, and including myself, and so we're here. So this is great stuff, and certainly I think that the audience can get a lot from you on this. So that takes us to the meet. Tell us a little bit about Tridot and your role there, because it's a pretty big role. You're a coach, but you're way more than that. So
yeah. So and again, Peter, I think that's a really a great question. For our people on the podcast, no matter where you are, I think that this piece right here will be very, very intriguing. I got to know Tridot really back in 2016, and I think that it was intriguing for me because when I was a pro triathlete, the training was real simple. It was literally all high volume, a lot of aerobic. You definitely pushed when you were in group sessions with runners or on rides or in swim sessions, but that was the gist of it. And then it was a taper, literally, 3 to 4 days before, and then go out and just race as hard as you could. I even found that maybe in trail running. I know when I did Western States, I did a training camp up there in OBrien, California, and I think literally in 3 days we ran 100 miles.
yeah. What year did you do Western States?
Oh, I want to say it was I could be a little bit off, but I want to say about 94.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I wanted to do that. And so as I went into to look at Tridot, I really got familiar with the platform and how they use, artificial intelligence and algorithms to really customize and optimize a training program for me. And it was based on my gender, my age, my sleep, my nutrition, my lifestyle, when I started swimming, biking, running, where I lived. So there was a lot of factors in there that really customized it to give me the best workouts. And I was shocked that I was like, whoa, I am training much different now. The first about 6 weeks on Tridot, I struggled to even finish the sessions. I was like, I'm again getting my butt handed to me because I've never trained this way before. But for me, I remember that vividly, and I think it was 2016 that I had signed up for 3 full Ironmans in 9 weeks. So think of a cadence of every 3 weeks. And in each one, I actually got faster and faster and faster on the run. And I'm like, whoa, this is huge. This is incredible that I could do that and see the benefit versus training 25 or 30 hours, which wasn't every week, which was not sustainable, and then started working with athletes. And I think the more you work with different athletes at different levels, you have a better understanding. But me doing the same program has been great. And since then, we have added so much to our platform to look at more variables, to look at more metrics, to make sure that we're not overtraining, to really understand the artificial intelligence. For example, just one little example. If I've got a week of training myself or with an athlete and they've got a threshold run session on, say, Wednesday, if it's fartleks or it's a progression run, and they are not meeting that prescribed session of what the intensity should be, the AI automatically adjusts the sessions for the weekend to back off the intensity because it's reading, I think we can read 1,000 different checkpoints in the hour to know that it's not me as a coach kind of creating a template like go ahead and do this. It's the AI working with that. And I'd say about 90% of the time it's spot on to say that you're going to be more productive, you're going to be more injury free. But I find that in doing that, it really prevents a lot of overtraining, and also that the continued cadence and the consistency of the athlete putting data into the system. Every workout, I think in swimming, just in swimming alone, I think we have 20 million different workouts versus I think every athlete, if they don't have something like that, they can get stale. They get into, it's like a strength training program where I'm checking the box, but I'm not varying my training at all. I can't figure out why I'm not doing any better. That you've got to literally mix it up and embrace that challenge. So I think with all the sophistication that we have now with, technology, that if it's, in the swim, especially on the bike, you can, get into so many different platforms. If it's Swift, is it full gas? Is it Ruby? You can sync your bike up to that, and it's really, really engaging. I think on the run too, there's so much information, out there right now that we can use for running. If it's, using a stride meter to look at your power, to work on the running drills, it's very comprehensive. And in addition to just the platform, I think the other beauty of Tridot is that we have so many people that aren't using Tridot, but they definitely are on the Facebook page. So we've got 17,000 people on that Facebook page. It's a community. Every week we have podcasts, and I've been fortunate to be on a few of those, and that's very educational. And then underneath the hood, we've got millions of resources for coaches and athletes, from videos, things that they can use to look at to really make sure that they understand the training, understand the why. And I think that makes a big, big change as we feel like we've got the best platform. And again, we've got patents on certain things, so someone else can't come alongside us and just copy us. So we're kind of, I think, as we look at that North Star, we always kind of put this out there that if there's another platform that can match up with Tridot, we definitely want to take a look at it. But we spent over 20 years. I know, again, I give Jeff Boer just a ton of credit of working on this, to have the vision to stay the course, and now working with Ironman in a multi-year partnership, we're going to have a bigger impact on the sport of triathlons.
Well, and you also have RunDot, but I think the bigger thing is Tridot, RunDot, predictive fitness is got an ethos of constantly improving, and that's what keeps you ahead, which is similar to what we're trying to do on the metabolic sphere. But I want to back up just a second, because I think this is an important point to make, because I know when I got into trail running in early 2000 and started to uncover this ultra endurance sphere, and I'd known about Ironman because I went to school in Davis at the same time as Dave Scott was living there. In fact, a friend of mine used to go run with him. But that aside, when I got into trail running, it was all, the endurance sphere when you're doing Ironman and ultras and things like that. The ethos was sort of like, if it didn't go well, you trained harder,
Mhm.
and overtraining was a huge factor. And, now you've had this evolution of different training programs, but Tridot has been a wonderful tool because of the algorithms and because it takes, a good coach can do that, but then they're always resetting the training, right? Whereas, the predictive fitness automatically adjusts the training to do that, but it takes a lot of input from the athlete as well as the coach and back and forth, whereas it doesn't. So, it's a pretty exciting development that more people should be aware of. It doesn't replace you as a coach or any other your coaches, but it really leverages the ability as a coach, right?
Yeah, and I think just spending a minute just a little bit more on the platform for the readers so they would understand that. Then I'll talk about the coach role, that they're very compatible with the platform, because some people in this day and age, like, why do you need a coach? I'll just follow the workout.
Yeah.
I think you're going to get some gains, but we have enough research to show that with a platform and a coach, you're definitely going to double that. But I think for the readers, and again, we've got podcasts. If you go into, kind of our queue of 250-ish podcasts, I think it's number 57. It's about normalized training stress. So the way I would break it down for a runner, and we even have an option now that up to 100 miles. So if we have runners out there that are listeners that are going to do a 100-mile run, that Rundot will definitely accommodate that. And that is really, really exciting, because I've made some tweaks for Ultramans with our platform with Tridot, but for Rundot, we have that variable now. But when you think about normalized training stress, I think most people understand what training stress is, that it's the amount of stress that you're putting on your body when you are training. But when you throw in that other variable that is normalized, you've got to kind of, again, lift up the hood of the car and think about, okay, so really what you're saying is this: when a weekly training block or even a mesocycle over weeks is planned out for the athlete, Tridot is taking a lot of things into consideration. What they're looking at is the discipline. Is it swimming? Is it running? Is it biking? Because they don't match up evenly. That the training stress is different in all three. So an hour swim is different than doing an hour run doing hill repeats. So they look at the discipline. They look at the duration. So you've got discipline, you've got duration. They even look at the intensity. So if I'm doing a workout where it's a fartlek workout and it's an hour total run and I'm doing it for 15 minutes, that's different than a swim for an hour when you're doing some zone forward work. So you've got to look at how much stress is at the various zones within that. The next thing Tridot works out, which I think is brilliant, is just the environmental factors. So for example, Peter, you're in Davis, California. You would train a certain way right there. I might have somebody that lives in Boulder, Colorado. I've got an 80-year-old triathlete that is in Park City, Utah at 7,000 feet. I've got someone else in Florida, in Orlando, where it's hot and humid and flat. When
And
it's a
sea level.
normal, yeah, it's sea level. So when it's normalized, the beauty of that is with the app, imagine this, depending upon even with Rundot, imagine this, that we're going to do a run at 6 in the morning and it's going to be 3,000 feet. Once we have our location, everything is synced into adjust your heart rate, adjust your pacing. Conversely, if it's July and it's 2 in the afternoon and it's 95 degrees in Davis, it's going to adjust for that. So every time you're adjusting that, it's not like a cookie cutter approach that you're just throwing that out there to say, well, here's what you should be doing for this week because you're 5 weeks out from a 50 miler or a 100 miler or a 70.3. And having that normalization, I find, because you're not going to miss anything. And I think that is really, really key right there for the listeners to understand that. I wish I would have had that years ago, but I know even when I got ready for Leadville, if I could get there 3 weeks before, I would run 4 days a week, and the other days for my recovery, there's only 54 14,000 foot peaks in Colorado. You know what we would do for 7 hours? We're just going to hike.
Yeah.
And just hiking, just that up and down. I'm stretching, I'm moving, quads, core, ligaments, tendons, connective tissue. But even when you're hiking at 11,000 feet, you're in a really high zone 2 heart rate. So it's that active recovery versus I got to hit the trails 7 days a week because that's what the Tarahumara's do. Well, I'm not a Tarahumara Indian. So you need to balance that out. So I think normalized training stress, definitely look at that because it's very, very innovative to know that's probably the most important thing when you're looking at a workout. And I think the other thing, I'm going to go back to the IQ of what the platform does. But more importantly, when you can couple that with an EQ of a coach that knows the platform, that can work with people, that has a high level of EQ, because I kind of play the role as I am the guide or the teacher. And I get to know the emotional intelligence of that athlete, knowing that most of coaching is really from the shoulders up. I want to feel that emotion from the athlete. I want to make sure that I can really get into where are they confident, where are they fearful, where's their anxiety, what about their nutrition, what about their recovery, have really deep conversations. And the AI isn't even quite able to do that yet, or race strategy, or talk about recovery, or talk about a misstep, or talk about race nutrition. That's the beauty of the coach. So the athlete gets the best of both worlds when they can use the platform. And again, we've done enough research to say when they've got a really knowledgeable coach. And to say you're a triathlon coach, that sounds really nice, but I think I've explained to people it's almost like preparing like a Thanksgiving meal. You got to be so good at doing so many things that you've got to know a great deal about swimming, biking, running, recovery, strength training, the psychology of racing, the tactics of racing, and nutrition. The nutrition, not during the race, but day-to-day nutrition, and then really focus in on the nutrition on race day, which Peter, you have just been fantastic, you and your team, to really provide some great insights for me that I can pass on to other people. So, and sometimes I don't have all the answers, but I feel confident in my coaching community of say 300 to 500 coaches. If I don't know the answer, I can usually get a hold of a coach, or I can call the mothership there at Vespa, Dr. Peter, and he can definitely give me some guidance on, hey, Peter, what do you think about this? And then we
Well,
kind of collaborate.
yeah, we've had great success with that. But yeah, so, you know, now that we've kind of know where Kurt is and what you're doing and how, you know, much of a change this is providing, what is, you know, you've been in the sport, the endurance sphere for a long time, and I'd like to get for the audience your view of the sport, where it is, what's happening, both, you know, and I'm sure, you know, while triathlon is your main focus, you know, you're tangentially in the biking, running communities at various distances and seeing what's happening. So let's get your take on where things are in the thing, because you know, of course, you started this partnership with Ironman, who not only is now doing the 70.3 and the full Ironman, but they've taken on UTMB. So I think you have the kind of relationship where you have perspectives most people don't have about what's happening in the sport.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting is I have to go back to probably that first, that first Ironman on Oahu in 1980. We thought it was just like I said, like a Woodstock. It was just going to be this crazy event we'll do one time and it's going to go away and hide underneath the rock. And little did we realize that it literally got legs, because I know that even in that race, I think the very next year, one of the top 10 finishers, I think it was Bill McKean. If you go back to that name way back in the 80s, I think he was at Western States, and I think he was like in the top 10. And then Western States was like, I'm not sure about this thing. This is really bizarre. So as we've seen this evolution over the past 40 years, I mean, let's be very candid. I mean, as listeners, that extreme is kind of, you know, a real niche for a lot of people. I don't think there's anything that's too extreme, because every time you think it's extreme, someone else is pushing the bar to do a lot more.
Well,
And
it takes pioneers, because this is a thought I've been having, because I know Gordy Ainsley pretty well. He was the
Mhm,
first guy to run it when he ran with the horses. And like you
mhm,
said, Ironman was like a one and done thing. They thought the same occurred with Western States. It was like, nobody's going to do this again. And then a couple of years later, a couple of guys did it. And then in 77, they had their first race and they didn't even know. So both sports were like these fringe things that most people wouldn't do. And now Ironman in Western States or UTMB are like, this is thing a lot of people are aspiring to do. It's like they say Western States is the new Boston. And of
Hmm.
course, Iron Man is iconic.
Hmm.
So it's kind of, it takes those people like you who are willing to go out and do something that seems impossible. And then people say, oh, yeah, well, that's just some freak people. But then, fast forward 20, 30 years, and now it's like, this is possible. And it's like I say, you, Kurt, are what normal should be.
Yeah. Well, you're being very kind, and I think back to your question, I think what I see now is that these events that were maybe super extreme back in the day, when you fast forward and you can list 10 or 15 of them, if it's Western States, if it's the Hurt 100, if it's Leadville, Hard Rock, if it's Kona, you can name all those. It's a very cherished place to be. It's not like I'm just going to pay the entry fee. It's like you've got to have to kind of do something to kind of earn your stripes to get to that point, which I think makes it even more special. And that's why I think so many people get so emotional when they're done. It's like, oh my gosh, this is beyond my wildest dreams. It kind of hits you really hard at the very end. And I've been there, coming up in Leadville, Western States, coming in the stadium. I mean, Hard Rock, coming down the street right there. It really just kind of grabs you. But I think it inspires other people. And I think that's the beauty of what we're trying to do now as a culture, as kind of an endurance culture, a stamina culture, is that when you're taking care of yourself, when you develop that grit, that tenacity, and David Goggins is a great example that I had a chance to work with David a little bit back in the day when he was getting ready for his first Ultraman, that what David has done with his life on the cards he was dealt as a kid has been incredible, and everyone has a story. And I think, again, as we look back to the point when we're not going to be able to do this anymore, and we talk about longevity, you want to check as many boxes as possible, that the more you rationalize it, the more it can be done. I was on a call today with two women, and this just warms my heart from the female side. They're both 64 years old. One has already qualified for Nice, and she just flat out told me this will be the toughest thing I have ever done in my entire life. And she's totally in. I've got someone else that says, I'm going to do whatever it takes to get to Nice. Now, these aren't 33-year-old girls. These are 64-year-old women. And when I see that, it's like, wait a minute. That's like the litmus test. It makes you take stock on, oh, no, 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 no. You can do it and get out there. And I think that's the beauty of it. I mean, safety is definitely a factor, and that's one thing I would caution people of. Don't get yourself into an event where you're going to hurt yourself. Being uncomfortable is fine, but don't put yourself in a medical situation. So the more I see people, and you go down the whole list, if it's, bad water, I mean, everything that's a race across America, all that stuff, it's like, oh, okay. That's kind of cool. So I think in a way it's good, because when we do that kind of in the endurance world or the ultra world, I think it's going to come back to our society and make us better, that we're going to start to believe in ourselves, and we understand hard work, and we cherish that, and we continue to do the best we can to build excellence in all aspects of life. And I think at the end of the day, you have been cheated if you can do those things.
Well, yeah, but to a point, you don't fake an Ironman or 100 miler. You have to. There's a certain amount of work and preparation one has to do. I mean, I've done races. I've done 100Ks where I wasn't prepared, but I have the foundation to do it. You have the foundation to do it. But somebody your regular person isn't going to be able to just fake a 100K or a 100 miler or an Ironman. So and I think that's important, because you know our society has become so abundant, and we've gotten all these conveniences, that I think people forget the work involved that got us here. And, these kind of sports really bring that back.
Hmm. Yeah, it does. And I know that one of my sons, as we have time to reflect, and he's definitely been influenced by what I've done, and he's very active, and he's in business now, but he, in our one-on-ones, he let me know, he says, Dad, that if people can't take care of themselves, how can they take care of other people? That you need to start with your sanctuary. And I think any type of movement, no matter where you are, we all have limiting things in life that are going to be limiting factors, and we have time and resources. But the main thing is we know that we are designed to move. And I think it's important to move, to have community, to eat reasonably well. And in doing that, it keeps you mentally sharp, and it keeps you physically going much longer than you thought, versus I'm going to kind of get in my recliner at the age of 55 and do something called retire. I think there's so much in life that we can do, even on a volunteer basis, to stay active. So I think that's the beauty of what's happening right now in our sports world.
Yeah, and I think, we've covered the innovation of AI, but there's, what I think in this last year you've been exposed to the innovation of what we're doing with Vespa and with optimizing your fat metabolism, where we're coming from the backside and developing that foundational physiology. Tell us a little bit about our story and how that's worked for you.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. As we know that Mike Badger, I mean, just a great guy and a bike fitter, and it was probably a year ago in about February, just doing the bike fit, and he's real casual, like, oh, by the way, I want you to try these little packets, and I'm looking at him like, okay, I can actually read. Doesn't seem like there's much here for me. And I just kind of threw them in the car, and I think they sat there for a month. And Mike was very professional and persistent. So, have you tried it? No, I haven't. Still doing my main thing and getting ready for Texas. And then one day I said, what the heck? I'm going to go ahead and kind of follow this protocol. And I was a little bit, I want to say a little bit, I was doubtful. I mean, just let's just put it out there that I was kind of that trained because of everything that we've done. I'm hitting my 300 calories per hour. I'm definitely loading up a lot of glycogen and gels and carbo fuel and all that stuff. And I'll tap that out, that I'm going to make some adjustments. And I'll tell you, that was an eye-opening experience that I'm like, wait a minute. So I'm only going to have 15 calories, a little bit of breakfast, take us 30 minutes before, 90 minutes into it. I'm going to have another one, and I'm only going to have 100 calories. I'm going to cut my caloric intake. I'll blow up, or I'll just bonk on the bike. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute. And I think for me, Peter, the turning point, I know I did one race rehearsal before Texas, and it was 5.5 hours, so I was right around 112 miles, and I averaged 20 miles an hour. I think my caloric intake was 400. I followed the Vespa protocol, cut back on those carbos, and I got off that bike and ran for 40 minutes. I'm like, whoa, this is what an epiphany. This feels good. I mean, it just felt good.
How'd you recover?
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, just being able to run that well for 40 minutes, and the next day I think I had a 2 hour run. I'm like, oh my goodness. And then you and I kind of putting our heads together, really studying, Texas, and saying, hey, we know the heat, we know the humidity, this is what we want to do. And it's just at that point I had that confidence to say I can always have an extra something if I need to, but I'm really going to try to reduce those simple sugars as long as possible, really utilize burning my fat. And I think you and I in our conversations, that based on what you know about me, that my body metabolizes fat pretty well. And I think that really, really helped me out. So I could
Yeah, the
run.
metabolic fitness. And I
Yeah.
think you said you were 38 minutes ahead of your calculated time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's always a game for me that I play. I love a challenge. So yeah, I was about 38 minutes ahead of my predicted time, but I think it was not only a great race as far as the execution, but I remember the next day, probably the adrenaline was still factored into this, but I know in the next day I was in the airport doing running drills, and my wife's like, I thought you just did an Ironman. And I'm like, well, I did, but my legs want to move. So,
Jeff Browning, after he did the Hurt 100, that was his first race, just 7 weeks into Vespa and OFM. He was taking photographs of his legs because they weren't swollen. He was doing air squats and videotaping those and sending them to his wife because they just remembered he was just destroyed after his previous races. So yeah,
mhm.
that's good. And you placed well in your age group. Was it third or fourth?
I think on that race I think I was fourth, a very competitive field, but I felt real good about my execution. And that's early in the year. I think for me, I'm more of an athlete that I try to put more stock into the second half of the year, kind of in the playoffs. And I know too that in my age group, I'm coming up, meaning that I'm almost out of my age group. So I get a lot of people that are just coming in at their
Well,
first year.
you had a pretty aggressive race schedule leading up to Nice last year.
I did. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I went from, my memory serves me correct, that I went from Texas, and then my next race, I was at Hanu, and that's a very warm 70.3 on the Big Island, and always an opportunity to try out Vespa again, but I had that same experience, and I won my age.
Coeur d'Alene.
That was after Hanu. I was getting there, Peter. You're one chapter ahead of me.
Okay.
So yeah, I had done Hanu and I won that, and then I actually went to Coeur d'Alene for a fall, and the weather was much more forgiving in Coeur d'Alene, and that worked out well. That I was second in my age group at Coeur d'Alene, and felt real good about my performance there.
Yeah, yeah. So this is a whole eye opener, and I think it's good for people to see that, skeptical but open, and at any age, right? You don't want to get set in your
Mm-hmm.
ways, and constantly being open and evolving, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. Um, you know, and I think it's important that the audience knows that what's going on right now is they're pushing a lot of carbs on one end, and then you have all the ketone people on the other end pushing all the ketones. So, as somebody who dives deep into the metabolic stuff, it's like we don't push the elimination. We're not keto, and you know that from working with
Right.
us. It's hardly a keto diet or a keto fueling protocol. You have some carbs, you just don't need as much. And by not using as much, you avoid the bonking, you avoid the GI distress, which is a big thing I've heard in Ironman.
Mm-hmm.
Those are two big challenges.
Oh yeah, it's just I think again just to spend a couple minutes on this. As people read on social media, there's so much information, and I think many times we take what the top pros are doing and figure that'll just kind of get cascading effect. That's good for age groupers, and I think we need to have a pure separation. We really do, because they're number one, their genetics, their background, their experience, their volume, the years they've done this, and how fast they race is far different than an average age grouper. And I think the common thing that is I hear every day is that you, quote, have to train your guts. You've got to train your gut. In other words, the more you can consume, it's not in your head, it's in your gut. You've got to continue to do that, because you're going to race better if you can put more calories in your body. And then I think, Peter, really through your education, me trying it as kind of the man in the arena, for lack of a better term. I know that's not true. And as I've looked at a full year just on the recovery and everything else that's going on, and then actually coaching, as I work with every athlete, I don't direct you have to do this, but I highly recommend and encourage. And I think I learned more from their failures. I had someone in the Ultraman in Arizona recently that had a plan, and they had done it in their race rehearsals, and I gave input, but I wanted this athlete to do what they needed to do. And literally after the first 2 days of just having in large quantities of maltodextrin and fructose, when that day 3 hit with that double marathon, it was literally lights out. I mean, GI problems from start to almost finish. And it was so sad to have that athlete go through that, but it was a good example of what we talked about, that was not the best nutritional protocol for that athlete. And it was that wake-up call that third night when we were just debriefing, at the dinner table. It's like, whoa, the light went off in my head. Now I get it. And you hate to have people go through that. It's like a horse that you want to kind of guide them a little bit, but sometimes you just need to let them go and say, once the horse stops, I'll remount the horse and we'll go a different direction. So I think that what I see is it probably, as I scan all the athletes I work with, and then all of the other coaches that I work with, the limiting factor is the athlete is going to have GI distress. So you have to kind of look at that like, wait a minute, you've done all the preparation, you can perform, you can execute, you understand pacing, you're street smarter, you're race savvy, and what you're telling me is because of your nutritional approach that is going to be your limiting factor. And they said, absolutely. And I'm like, oh my goodness, we have a big gap to fill there. And again, we're preaching and teaching to our coaches and athletes, even in trail running, that the two most important variables, I think, pacing for sure, number one, so you don't burn all your matches early on. But if you cannot get your nutritional plan dialed in according to what it's going to be like on race day, and you and I have been very good on that, and you have let me know that if I'm doing a race in Texas where I have high humidity and high heat, it's far different than I'm in a race where I did a race rehearsal last weekend, and it was cold and windy in San Diego. It was 60 degrees. I didn't need as much as I would if it was 85. I mean, I was shocked. I went through, I think, 2 bottles in 5 hours, but I watched my heart rate, I watched my power, I was doing the VESA protocol. I wasn't like, okay, I got to drink 5 bottles in 5 hours. I was not creating that heat. So I think it's trial and error, and also let people know that they really need to reassess of what's going to be their limiting factor in any ultra endurance event and nail it down immediately. And I think, again, don't go by what pros are doing. You've got to go with what's best for you. So for me, it's almost a no-brainer. And I've talked about that, is that we're seeing more of our athletes have success with Vespa because they get it. They understand that. I know that we had a couple of athletes getting ready for Boston, and that one in particular had an awesome race.
Oh, great.
He did. Yeah, he went 3:14. He was 2 minutes off. It got a little bit warm, but
Yep.
he had it all dialed in. And to me, that warms my heart. Like, so you don't need to carry a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. We're not going to have Oreos at the halfway point.
Yep.
And no, it was incredible, Peter. So a shout out to you. And I think the more we can do that, because people will only do what they hear or read about. They're not doing the education. They're not doing a deep dive on really what's going on. And I think too, Peter, you've pointed this out, and I get it. It's just not the short-term effects, but long-term effects.
Oh, yeah.
And the stress we're putting in our GI tract. And again, we know that disease can start there. So it's really important to say, I think I can find a better way, not to go full ketone, but to make sure that we understand, because I think that can be dangerous. To me, that's a little bit extreme, and not to pinpoint certain people, but I know there's some people I work with that are vegans, and they're very challenged. When we look at their macronutrients and everything, that they're missing some of that. I'm not to say that's for everyone, but I know as a case that, just to share with our listeners, you just got to really watch your diet and then leverage that Vespa as you're getting into your longer sessions.
Yeah, no. And you brought up a good point. It's, doing what the pros do or doing what somebody else is doing isn't the way. This is where the unfortunate reality is people are being bombarded with online marketing and all this, like what the pros are doing, and that's all they hear. So that's what they know. They don't know, and people aren't getting the message that you are an individual, and your own internal body has what it needs to fuel 80-90% of what you do, and that those carbs you use or those ketone esters, that should be icing on the cake. But the message is you're going to burn all these calories. You need to take all these calories in, and people don't realize, because it's more complicated. It's like you say, people need to do the deeper dive, but nobody really has time for it. So that's where, fortunately, a coach like you who's had the experience and realizes, wait a second, I can fuel most of my fueling needs from my own body, and then just taking a little and avoid the bonking, avoid the GI issues, and just feel better is sort of the message we want to get out, because that's the problem, is like my message is not profitable, because most of the stuff we do, other than buying Vespa and a few supplements, is free. You can do it yourself and it doesn't cost you anything, and there's no market in that, right? So that's kind of the thing that people need to realize is what you don't hear sometimes has more effect than what you are getting bombarded with, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So, and I think you covered a lot of things about the context, like Ironman Texas. You're going to be hydrating more and less calories, and on a cooler ride, you probably can push the calories and forget about the hydration.
Yeah, and I think it's worth spending a couple of minutes on that, because I think when we talk about hydration, some people really misinterpret what that means. Some people would think if it's hydration, that means that I should just drink. I talked to someone earlier today, and they were telling me that they were in some challenge, that the challenge was to drink a gallon of water a day.
Oh God.
And I'm like,
yeah.
I'm like, okay. And I didn't judge. I just listened. I know some people you got to drink more water. It's good for your system. It keeps all the toxins out and everything else. At the same time, I think we need to maybe temper that enthusiasm a little bit to say that let's talk about what happens when you continue to drink large quantities of water, that you're losing a lot of electrolytes, that you've got to kind of listen to your body. And I think that's where experience comes into play. I know I can give numerous examples, but a few in particular. If I'm running in the hard rock at 10,000 feet in elevation, I know the temperature is probably between 60 and 70 degrees. At nighttime, might drop down to 40. The amount of hydration I need is going to be impacted. I also need to know that I'm at 10,000 feet, so I'm going to need a little bit more. At the same time, if I'm running the third day of the Ultraman in Kona, and I'm running a double marathon down the Queen Cam Highway, I know that my crew at the start of 50 miles, they have 50 pounds of ice. And that might sound like you guys are going to have a wild party. No, that's what's going to take us to go for 9 hours to get to the finish line so this guy doesn't overheat and cook himself.
That's
And
right.
I think that hydration, it's the balance of knowing how much you need to have, what are certain parts of the body I should really try to keep cool, not to overhydrate, not to underhydrate, but also understand the complexity of, am I taking in caffeine? Because that can be a diuretic.
Oh
Is it a
God, yes. Yeah.
is it a hypertonic solution? Because if 2 scoops makes you go fast, 4 scoops will make me go faster. And if I take in 6 scoops, I'll have flames coming off the back of me, and it's so hypertonic, it's so saturated, you're going to get dehydrated. So
Yep.
there's so much education that you can definitely be textbook smart. And I think it's a combination of knowing big picture items on nutrition, but being out in the arena to learn that it's going to really, really be
Yeah.
able to change. And I know the last thing I'll say on this topic about hydration, it was in Boulder in 2020. I think it was about 2019. Um, it started off to be a little warm day. The swim wasn't too bad. I got about halfway through the bike and it was probably 85 degrees. And I'll never forget, I just went around this one turn. It's like, oh my gosh, what just happened? I'm at 5,000 feet in elevation. I've got radiant sun coming down on me. It's all of a sudden it's like 95. And I'm every 10 miles, I'm literally grabbing 3 bottles and dumping it in my kit to make it to the next 10 miles. When I got off that bike, it was like 102 degrees. And I'm like, oh my goodness. I think in that race, only 58% of the people finished that. They got into trouble overnight because they didn't realize what was going on. I think for me, literally what saved my backside was that I think I had that tuition of experience. Like, no, I'm going to adapt here on the fly, because some people are so linear in their thinking that they have timers and buzzers and bells and whistles. Like every 20 minutes, they're going to do X, Y, and Z. Have the plan, but you also need to be flexible because things are going to change. I think for me finishing second in my age group, what got me through that race was I was a little bit ahead of the curve, and I felt so bad for people that were literally on the side of the road, unable to continue, either on the bike or on the run, because they didn't understand that hydration.
Yeah, hydration and thermoregulation are just the most dynamic aspect of this. And I think a lot of like bonking issues are actually significantly triggered by under or over hydration. And to a point, when I ran Western States, I had, that was my first 100, and I ran in 2006, and only half the field finished because it was the hottest year in the record of the race, and it was just carnage. But like you say, it's an awareness and then paying attention to the different variables that go into play and being able to adapt. And I think this is a good place to start wrapping it up for us is, you know, it's like I say, whether a person likes it or not, we're all signed up for that ultra endurance event called life, right?
Yeah, right.
And like my friend Bruce LaBelle, who's a Western States legend, says, you know, the only thing you can expect to go wrong is something you didn't plan for on a 100-miler. And I think that you, with your experience, can agree to that. And I think adaptability is a really great thing. And part of that adaptability is being open to what's changing. So, you know, let's some final parting words about your thoughts on endurance and sport and where we're going, and trying to make things better for everybody, not just to perform better, but to be better. You know, and how, you know, what we're doing independently and collaboratively is helping to drive that.
Yeah, I think when I think about that is, and I think as you get older, you do get a little bit wiser. So wisdom is key and experience is key. But I think as we know we're going to live one life, and to look at everything that's going to inspire you, your bucket list, if you will. I think the biggest regret that a lot of people have is they They didn't do what they thought they could do when they could do it, and then it's actually too late. So to me, it's a form of play. I'll just be very candid. I know how old I am. At the same time, it's almost like a kid. We're going to go out there and we're going to climb, we're going to hike, we're going to swim, bike, run, do all those things. So look at your bucket list and really make it more of a lifestyle. That when you adapt that active lifestyle, no matter where you are in the mix, you don't, again, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you're on the podium or if you win. The main thing is you went the distance. And I think that is really, really cool. And then also, I think the thing is when you embrace the lifestyle, it's creating those atomic habits that you're very consistent. It's like, no, these are non-negotiable. I'm going to do something every day to help me mentally, physically, spiritually, and not make excuses. And then on top of that, when you look at the fueling, I kind of use the analogy of the stool, that you've got to look at one leg of the stool is your training. You've got to look at the other part of this stool. The other leg is your nutrition, and nutrition means that you're eating reasonably well, you're eating fairly clean, and then again, something like Best Buy I think is a game changer when you look at long-term success in ultra distance events. You're going to be much better off going that direction. And then I think the other part is just that recovery. That when you can balance that out. So if you're doing the recovery, you're doing the nutrition, you're getting that heavy lifting, you're going to be much better off. And I think that's one thing that we all need to remember in this busy, crazy world of going at 100 miles an hour all the time. We've got to put the pause on sometimes. We've got to reflect and balance that out, because good recovery is really key. And don't limit yourself that quote, you're too old, you can't do that. And I used the example earlier today that one person I was talking to, that she just told me, she goes, I'm 64 years old, I'm not too old to do this. And I'm going to, I need more people like you versus a lot of people at 64. They're like, I'm almost ready for the retirement home or assisted living. It's like, no, you got a lot of, a lot more years to go. And I know I'm inspired by the people around me. I talked about, an athlete that I have in Park City. He's going to be racing in Kona in October in the 80 to 84 age group, and he's really, really serious. He's been on the podium before in Kona. And then it was funny, I was in Hanu last year and talking to this gentleman. He emailed me 3 days ago and he said, I want you to coach me. And guess what age group he is in? 80 to 84. So
Go.
I've got two people that are fierce competitors, and they are just very, very active in their lifestyle. So when we look at that, knowing that we're all going to get on that gradual decline, but the main thing is you're out there, you're going to feel good about what you're doing, and you never realize how you're going to inspire other people around you.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of that inspiration, Kurt, is hats off to you, is it's not just your coaching and you're playing, like you say, this is play to you, you've created this lifestyle, but part of that lifestyle is having a sense of purpose that's beyond just you. You're helping others. You're like I say, we have a rising tide that floats all boats, and I think that's part of it. And that's with our busy lives, we kind of forget that we kind of have to give back as part of that journey.
Yeah, totally. But I want to thank you, Peter, in closing for this opportunity. I want to thank the listeners. And if you ever need me, you can email me at Kurt, Kurt, .Madden, Madden, at Tridot.com, and be glad to answer your questions. Or if I can add value to your training or you have questions about nutrition, definitely get a hold of Peter, but you can always run it by me.
Yeah, run it by Kurt, and then he'll put it on to me, and we'll tag team you. But yeah, thanks for doing that, because I was just going to say, where can they find you? And you just answered that question. So Kurt, wonderful conversation. Let's do it again in several months and continue to move things forward in every way.
Sounds great, Peter. Thank you so much.